Welcome back to the Gardening with Joy and Holly radio show. Amy Pennington, moments away. But first, a message from our good friends at Simple Grow.
Are you worried about your plant growth? Provide your plants with what they need to grow to their potential. Simple Grow offers 100% organic worm castings at simplegrow.com. Unlike other worm casting products, when you order from Simple Grow, you're getting 100% worm castings, not filler plus castings. Promote ideal soil structure and aeration with Simple Grow's all-natural and odor-free worm castings. There's only one ingredient, worm castings. No chemicals or additives will seep into your food, and it doesn't smell like other fertilizers. For indoor and outdoor use, you can order by the bag, bundle, ton, or truckload. Check out what Simple Grow 100% worm castings can do for your plants and order today at simplegrow.com.
Well, Holly, let's go to the Proclamation Hotline brought to you by Proclamation Goods and bring in our guest for this week.
Amy Pennington is a Seattle urban farmer who is passionate about all things green. She's also a writer, author, and food as medicine advocate. Her newest book is called Tiny Space Gardening. Welcome to the program, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to start out with a question about your book, Tiny Space Gardening. We bring a lot of authors on this show, and they all have a aha moment that caused them to start with the book. What was the aha moment? What was the inspiration for writing this book?
You know what? I actually have to give credit to an old friend. Her name's Whitney Ricketts. She was working at a publishing house at the time. She was a dear friend of mine. And I had a little apartment with a big garden and a big kitchen, even though the kitchen was tiny, but I was producing a lot out of there and preserving my own food and just basically treating it like I was living on a farm, even though I lived smack dab in the middle of Seattle. And she's the one that said, will you just write a book on apartment gardening, on how to grow food in an apartment? And I thought, oh, that's so smart, actually. Yes, I will do that. And that's kind of how it happened. So it wasn't even my idea. It's just someone framed it in such a way. I thought there's a lot of gardening books on the marketplace. And so it's like, what could you possibly add to the mix? Plants are plants. Plants need certain nutrients. That doesn't change. Everything needs sun. That doesn't change. But this is just a slightly different perspective for people who genuinely have smaller spaces or spaces that they're maybe transitioning in and out of. If you're in a condo or an apartment, it might not be your forever home. And so it's from that perspective, just sort of how do you maximize your time and space and energy, knowing that you're not creating this magical garden that will forever be in your life.
Right. And I think the tiny space gardening, I think that appeals to everybody, whether you have a 40-acre garden or a 4 square foot garden. That kind of is the everybody can utilize this book.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a great Kickstarter if you're just getting into gardening. And if you're really wanting to garden and you don't have a ton of space or you're limited in some way, it's a great starter.
Absolutely. So Joey and I, many years ago, grew vegetables on our apartment patio. We really enjoyed it. What are some of your best patio, small space, maybe windowsill type of gardening tips?
So windowsill gardening is very different in my mind from gardening in a tiny space, meaning someplace outside. So tiny space to me is a balcony, a fire escape, just something where you have a little bit of access, a shelf outside the window. Sometimes you open them and you can hang something there. And that is basically where your space is just incredibly restricted. And so you're really going to look at plants where you can have bang for your buck. Whereas a windowsill that's a whole nother ball of wax. Trying to grow something inside is a little bit different. And so we do talk about that in the book as well, how to do that if you don't actually have access to outdoor space. So yeah, that's kind of the distinction between the two.
Now, in the process of creating and writing this book, first of all, what is something unique in the book that our listeners would enjoy? And second part of the question is, what is something that you learned while doing this book project and publishing a book?
Well, I think for anyone who reads the book or picks up the book and listeners, even if you have a small space, you can actually grow fruit trees. And so I think a lot of times we tend to think small lettuces and herbs, which are great, but you can actually, they're conditioning trees and fruit trees now where you can really have a dwarf variety. So you can grow like a conical apple tree, and that it literally, not conical, columnar. It's a columnar apple tree, and it grows up in a column, pretty much straight. And then the branches are, 3 to 4 inches off that main stem, and there's an apple on each branch. So that's pretty awesome. I think that's really fun. It feels really special and magical when you can grow apples in a really small space like that. I also personally really love growing and eating flowers and herbs. That to me is really what makes a big difference in your day-to-day cuisine. Like you can freshen up any dish if you have a little bit of fresh herb, and then when those herbs flower, the flavor is really potent. They're awesome. So I think that's the most surprising part. What surprised me? That's a good question. What did surprise me?
Well,
I don't know. I don't.
We can come back to that, and while you ponder that, So,
we're talking with Amy Pennington, Seattle urban farmer and author-writer.
So, what is the biggest misconception about small space gardening? Is it kind of what you spoke about, that people think, only herbs and lettuces, and that's all I can grow because I've only got so tiny of a space?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think people just don't really think about how much they can actually grow in a small space. I think people are confused about what plants to put in a small space. Like there are plants that you won't get a lot out of versus plants that you will. So I think that's the biggest misconception. Exactly. It's like that you're not going to be able to produce very much. B, even if you have a small space, like you don't actually need outdoor space in order to grow food. You can grow microgreens on your countertop. You can sprout things at home, and that's still something that's really green and fresh. And then also, of course, that it's hard. I think a lot of people think that gardening is difficult or very challenging, but it's really not. Like when you're in a small space, especially, it's pretty easy to get going. You don't need very many resources, and you can be off and on your way.
And we want to let our listeners know you have not just wrote Tiny Space Gardening. You've got a number of books under your name.
Yeah. A lot of cookbooks, and this was my first gardening book, or this is my second gardening book. But most of the other books are about cooking and all about seasonal whole foods cooking.
And I think we've gotten away away from that as a society, that seasonal cooking and eating, because we can go to the grocery store and get anything we want any time of the year we want. And we don't even think anything of it.
Yeah, we're so spoiled. And the interesting thing is, Joey, that when you are actually eating produce and food that are in season, the flavor is totally different. So a lot of times people are like, I don't really like eggplant. I don't really like peppers. And it's like, right, because you're actually eating it off season when it's not super ripe, not from a field, not sun-kissed. And that really matters. The sun-hitting fruit converts carbohydrates into sugars, and that changes the flavor of vegetables. There's no two ways about it. And so a lot of times when fruits and vegetables are being grown commercially, they're being grown in order to be strong enough to ship, so they're harvested at a time where they'll last on the shelves for a long time, not at their absolute peak. That's why tomatoes taste so great from the garden, because you're pulling it off the vine right when it's exactly ready versus picking it 2 weeks early so that it will be shelf stable.
Right. And
it's a really big difference.
Right. And some of the stuff is picked under not even ripe, and then they gas it on the way to the store, so it magically gets ripened on the shelf.
So what is an urban farmer? You refer to yourself as an urban farmer. And how does it different from maybe a backyard gardener?
An urban farmer is someone who lives in an urban environment and has to contend with all of the factors that introduces into the gardens. For instance, in an urban environment, you're often surrounded by taller buildings. You might have a tall building in front of you blocking sun at certain times of day, like the sun might be on your garden in the morning, tuck behind a building at the midday, and then come around the other side of the building in the afternoon. And so you're dealing with structures and things in your way, and oftentimes much smaller footprint. So a lot of times in an urban environment, we just don't have as much property on the lots. It's like a smaller, denser population, whereas a backyard farmer, you have a backyard. not all urban farmers actually have a backyard. You have sometimes a little tiny, like I'm in Brooklyn right now, and we have a little 10 by 10 swath of land in the backyard. So that's the difference.
Now, with the tiny space gardening, are in it with that concept in the book, are you referring to using the natural light, or are you also okay with bringing in artificial LED lights to supplement what you can't get?
No, the book only focuses on natural light, actually. Bringing in light to grow something is another totally different ballgame. It's a totally different approach. You need totally different supplies. It's a different way of thinking about things. And so this book specifically is just about natural light. Or if you have no light at all and you just need a few countertop projects, we cover that as well.
Fantastic. So we really appreciate having you on the show and enjoyed all of your great information. How can people find out more about you?
Well, the best place to find out everything that I offer and am doing is my website. So it's my name with a dash. So it's amy-pennington.com.
And we greatly appreciate the time you've offered Holly and myself and all of our listeners, and the education that you've shared with all of us. We thank you for that.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you both. Take care.
Absolutely. And
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.